You ain't welcome here, Breed. The words cut through the saloon's tobacco haze like a blade through leather. Jake Thornton's fingers tightened around his whiskey glass, the amber liquid trembling as boots scraped against weathered floorboards behind him. The scent of sawdust and stale beer couldn't mask the metallic taste of trouble brewing in his mouth. Sheriff Briggs stood in the doorway, silver badge catching lamplight, his hand resting on his gun belt with practiced ease. Behind him, 3 deputies flanked the entrance like vultures waiting for carrion. Half-breed don't belong drinking with decent folk. Jake set down his glass with deliberate calm, though his heart hammered against his ribs. Outside, thunder rolled across the Montana territory, promising rain that wouldn't come for hours yet. The saloon fell silent except for the steady tick of the wall clock and the creak of leather as men shifted in their chairs. "I paid for this drink same as anyone," Jake said, his voice steady despite the fire building in his chest. His Apache mother's blood had marked him from birth with darker skin and black hair that refused to lie flat, while his father's Irish features gave him green eyes that seemed to unnerve folks more than comfort them. Briggs stepped closer, spurs jangling with each measured step. "Maybe so, but that don't make you welcome." The batwing doors swung open again, letting in a gust of prairie wind that stirred the dust at Jake's boots. A woman entered, her dress torn at the hem and mud-stained from travel. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders, auburn strands catching the light like copper wire. She moved with the careful gait of someone who'd learned to expect danger from every shadow. "Please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need help." Briggs turned toward her, his expression shifting from menace to something approximating civility. "Ma'am, you'd best speak with someone more suitable to your station." Jake felt heat rise in his neck, but before he could speak, the woman's eyes found his. Something passed between them. Recognition of shared exile, perhaps, or simply the understanding that comes between outcasts. She reached into her coat pocket with trembling fingers. "I'm looking for someone," she continued, pulling out a small braided ring made of black horsehair. "Someone who might know about this." The ring tumbled from her fingers, rolling across the rough floorboards until it stopped at Jake's boots. He bent to retrieve it, and the moment his fingers touched the braid, the world tilted beneath him like a horse stumbling in a gopher hole. He knew this ring, had watched his sister Sarah weave it from their father's stallion, back when they were children playing in the shadow of the Bitterroot Mountains. Back before the fever took their parents, and the territorial authorities split them apart like calves from their mothers. "Where did you get this?" Jake's voice came out hoarse, urgent. The woman's eyes widened, hope flickering across her features like candlelight in a drafty room. Sarah Thornton. She gave it to me before." Her voice broke and she wrapped her arms around herself as if trying to hold her pieces together. Sheriff Briggs stepped between them, his bulk blocking the lamplight. "Now, see here, Breed. You leave this lady be. She don't need your kind of trouble." But Jake was already standing, the ring clutched tight in his fist. "Sarah's my sister. Was my sister." The words tasted like ashes. "Been looking for her since they took her to the mission school in '68. The woman, he realized he didn't even know her name, pressed forward despite Briggs' intimidating presence. "My name is Elena Martinez. I was held at a settlement near Crow Agency. Sarah was there too until..." She swallowed hard, her knuckles white where she gripped her torn coat. "Until the fever took her last winter." The saloon seemed to spin around Jake like a dust devil. Sarah, dead. The sister he'd been searching for across 3 territories, gone while he'd been chasing false leads and broken promises. The ring felt heavy as a millstone in his palm. Liar, Briggs snarled, though Jake couldn't tell if he meant Elena or Jake himself. Breeds stick together with their stories. Probably stole that ring herself. Elena flinched as if struck, but her chin lifted with defiant pride. Sarah spoke of you constantly. Said you taught her to track deer by the creek behind your cabin. Said you carved her initials in the old oak tree before they took her away. Jake's throat tightened. Those details weren't in any official record, weren't something she could have learned from anyone but Sarah herself. The tree, he whispered. Still there. Still has her mark. See? Briggs turned to address the gathered men, his voice rising like a preacher's on Sunday. Conspiracy between breeds and their sympathizers. Can't trust a word from either of them. The other patrons muttered agreement, some standing from their tables with hands drifting toward their weapons. Jake recognized the mood, had seen it before when frontier justice superseded territorial law. Elena pressed closer to his side, seeking protection he wasn't sure he could provide. There's more, Elena said quietly, her words meant for Jake alone. Sarah, she kept records, names and places. The men who ran that settlement, they weren't operating under any legal authority. They were selling people, Jake. Native girls, Mexican women, anyone they could claim as wards of the territory. The implications hit Jake like a mule kick to the chest. If Elena spoke truth, then Sarah hadn't died from simple fever at a legitimate mission school. She'd died in captivity, probably trying to expose men who trafficked in human misery for profit. Papers, Jake said. You have papers? Elena nodded toward her coat. Hidden, but not safe to show here. Briggs had been listening, his face darkening with each exchange. Enough talk. Martinez, you come with me for questioning. Breed, you get out of my town before I find reason to arrest you too. On what charge? Jake demanded. Conspiracy to defraud territorial authorities. Inciting public disturbance. Take your pick. Thunder rolled closer now, rattling the saloon windows. Rain began pattering against the glass like nervous fingers drumming on wood. The storm would provide cover, Jake realized, but also trap them if they waited too long. Elena's hand brushed his arm, a gesture so brief it might have been accidental. But her eyes conveyed urgent meaning. The papers she carried were worth more than their individual safety. You want to see Sarah's grave? She whispered. Jake nodded, understanding passing between them again. Whatever evidence Sarah had gathered, whatever truth she died protecting, Elena carried it now. And Briggs's eagerness to separate them suggested the sheriff knew exactly what that truth might reveal. Time's up, Briggs announced, drawing his pistol with theatrical slowness. Deputies, escort Miss Martinez to the jail for her own protection. Thornton, you've got 5 minutes to clear out. But as the deputies moved forward, Elena stepped backward toward the saloon's rear exit, the one that led to the alley behind the building. Jake caught her meaning and followed, keeping his movements casual even as his pulse hammered in his ears. Stop right there, Briggs shouted, but Elena had already pushed through the back door into the rain-soaked darkness beyond. Jake followed, hearing boots thunder across floorboards behind them. The alley reeked of horse manure and rotting vegetables, but it offered multiple escape routes through the maze of buildings that made up the town's commercial district. Elena ran with surprising grace, despite her torn dress, her bare feet splashing through puddles that reflected brief flashes of lightning. Jake kept pace beside her, his longer stride compensating for her head start. "This way," he called, gesturing toward a gap between the hardware store and the church. His horse waited 2 blocks over, tied behind the boarding house where he'd taken a room. They squeezed between buildings, their shoulders brushing weathered, clapboard siding. Elena's breathing came hard, but steady, like someone accustomed to running for her life. Behind them, voices shouted conflicting directions as Briggs organized his search. "Why help me?" Elena gasped as they pressed against the church wall, waiting for a group of deputies to pass. Jake touched the braided ring, still clutched in his fist. "Sarah would have wanted me to." They reached his horse as the church bell chimed 10 o'clock. The gelding snorted nervously at the approaching storm, but stood steady as Jake helped Elena mount behind him. Her arms circled his waist as they rode out into the rain, heading toward the foothills where territorial authority grew thin, and Apache justice ran deeper than sheriff's badges. Lightning illuminated the trail ahead in stark, white flashes, revealing rocky outcroppings and stands of pine that offered potential shelter. Jake guided the horse by instinct and memory, following paths he'd traveled since childhood, when this land belonged to different laws and older truths. "There's a line cabin about 5 miles north," he called over the thunder. "We can shelter there until dawn." Elena's grip tightened around his waist. "The papers," she said. "Sarah hid them in a metal box, sealed with wax and hidden inside the cabin walls. If we can reach it." "If," Jake repeated grimly. Briggs wouldn't give up easily, especially if he suspected what Elena carried. A corrupt sheriff with territorial backing could muster resources that would make their flight across open country nearly impossible. The cabin materialized from the darkness, like a ship emerging from fog, its log walls silvered by rain and lightning. Jake dismounted first, then helped Elena down, his hands lingering on her waist longer than strictly necessary. She looked up at him with eyes that held too much pain for someone so young. Inside, the cabin smelled of dry wood and old smoke. Jake found oil and matches while Elena collapsed into a chair by the cold fireplace, exhaustion finally claiming her now that they'd reached temporary safety. "The box," she said. Sarah said to look behind the 3rd log from the hearth, about waist high. Jake ran his hands along the indicated wall, feeling for loose chinking or irregularities in the wood. His fingers found a section where the clay mortar crumbled at his touch, revealing a cavity just large enough for a small container. The metal box clinked as he withdrew it, its contents shifting inside like dice in a gambler's palm. The wax seal bore Sarah's mark, a small cross carved into the red wax with her fingernail. Jake's sister had always been clever with details, even as a child. Elena watched as he broke the seal and opened the box. Inside lay several sheets of paper covered in Sarah's careful handwriting, along with a territorial ledger bound in cracked leather. The ledger's pages listed names, dates, and monetary amounts in 2 different colors of ink: black for legitimate transactions, blue for something else entirely. "Slave trade," Elena explained quietly. Briggs and his associates would claim legal guardianship over native girls and Mexican women, then sell them to mining camps and cattle ranches as indentured servants. The blue ink shows the real money, where they sold us and for how much. Jake's hands trembled as he read Sarah's notes. His sister had documented everything with methodical precision. False documents filed with territorial authorities, bribes paid to officials, even specific locations where women were held before sale. The scope of the operation stretched across 3 territories and involved dozens of officials. This could bring down half the territorial government, he said. That's why Sarah died for it, and why Briggs will kill us both if he gets the chance. Thunder crashed directly overhead, shaking the cabin walls. Through the window, Jake could see torches moving in the distance, too organized and numerous to be anything but a search party. Briggs had gathered more men than expected, probably promising rewards for their capture. How many? Elena asked, following his gaze. Dozen, maybe more. Too many to fight. But even as he spoke, Jake was formulating alternatives. The cabin sat at the mouth of a narrow valley that led deeper into the mountains, toward terrain where horses couldn't follow, and Apache survival skills trumped territorial authority. If they could reach the high country before dawn— "Can you ride bareback?" he asked. Elena nodded. "Sarah taught me before—" She didn't finish, but Jake understood. His sister had prepared Elena for exactly this situation, had given her survival skills along with the evidence that could expose their captors. Jake stuffed the papers and ledger inside his coat, securing them against the weather. Outside, the torches had drawn closer, their light fragmenting through the rain like broken stars. Voices carried on the wind, Briggs shouting orders, deputies calling responses. They slipped out the cabin's back window, leaving the door barred from inside to buy precious minutes. Jake's horse waited in the trees, ground-tied and patient despite the approaching storm. He boosted Elena onto the animal's back, then swung up behind her. The trail into the high country was treacherous in daylight, potentially fatal in darkness and rain. But Jake had traveled it before, had learned its secrets from his Apache grandmother before the fever claimed her too. The horse picked its way carefully between loose rocks and washouts, guided by instinct and Jake's gentle pressure on the reins. Behind them, shouts erupted as the search party reached the cabin. Torches bobbed frantically as men discovered their quarry had vanished again. But the delay would cost Briggs valuable time. By morning, Jake and Elena would be deep in territory where white men's law held no power. "Where are we going?" Elena asked as they climbed higher into the mountains. "Sacred ground," Jake replied. "Place where my grandmother's people settled disputes according to older laws. If we can reach the council fire before Briggs catches us, we can present Sarah's evidence to tribal elders." It was a desperate gamble. The Apache had no love for territorial authorities, but they also had little reason to trust a half-breed who'd lived among white men for most of his adult life. Still, the evidence Elena carried transcended racial boundaries. It documented crimes against all native peoples, not just individual tribes. Lightning revealed the trail ahead in stroboscopic flashes. Narrow ledges carved into cliff faces, stream crossings swollen by runoff, stands of pine that whispered warnings in ancient tongues. The horse stumbled once, then found its footing and continued climbing. Dawn found them on a high plateau overlooking the valley they'd fled during the night. Smoke rose from a dozen cooking fires scattered across the grassland below, marking the seasonal gathering place where multiple tribes converged to trade goods and settle disputes. The sight filled Jake's chest with something between hope and terror. "Council fire," he told Elena, pointing toward the largest group of lodges. "We present our case there, or we die trying." Elena's arms tightened around his waist. "Together," she said simply. They rode into camp as the sun climbed above the eastern peaks, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Warriors emerged from their lodges to watch the strangers approach, their faces impassive but alert. Jake recognized some of them from his childhood, though whether they remembered him remained to be seen. An elder stepped forward as they dismounted near the council fire. His weathered face bore the intricate tattoos of a war chief, but his eyes held the wisdom of someone who'd seen too much violence and learned to prefer justice over vengeance. "Half-blood," the elder said in accented English. "You bring trouble to our gathering place." Jake reached inside his coat and withdrew Sarah's papers, holding them out like an offering. "I bring truth, Uncle. Truth about crimes against all our people." The elder studied the documents with growing interest, his expression darkening as he read Sarah's meticulous notes. Other warriors gathered around, listening as Jake explained the ledger's contents and Elena's testimony about the illegal slave trade. "Your sister was brave," the elder said finally. "Her death demands justice." But even as he spoke, dust clouds appeared on the horizon. Briggs and his deputies, still pursuing their quarry despite the dangerous terrain. The sheriff had either recruited more men or convinced local ranchers to join his posse. Either way, the approaching riders outnumbered the warriors at the council fire. "Territorial law has no authority here," the elder continued. "But bullets respect no boundaries." Jake felt Elena's hand slip into his, her fingers intertwining with his own. Whatever happened next, they would face it together, united by Sarah's sacrifice and their shared commitment to exposing the truth. Briggs rode into camp with 20 armed men, their rifles held ready but not yet aimed. The sheriff's face was flushed with anger and exhaustion, but his voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to having his orders obeyed. "I'm here for the fugitives," he announced. "Territorial business." The elder stepped forward, Sarah's papers still clutched in his weathered hands. "These documents show territorial business built on lies and theft. Your authority comes from corruption." Briggs's eyes narrowed as he recognized the ledger. "Those papers are forgeries, evidence manufactured by criminals to avoid justice." But the elder had lived too long and seen too much to be intimidated by bluster. He gestured toward Jake and Elena, then addressed the gathered warriors in rapid Apache. Nods and murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. "Council will hear testimony," the elder announced. "Truth will be weighed against lies." "I don't recognize your authority," Briggs snarled, his hand moving toward his weapon. "Then you die ignorant," the elder replied with calm finality. The standoff stretched like a bowstring under tension, both sides measuring odds and calculating costs. Jake realized this moment would determine not just their individual fates, but the future of everyone who'd suffered under Briggs's corrupt authority. Elena stepped forward, her voice carrying across the silent camp. "I bear witness to crimes against Sarah Thornton and dozens of other women. This man sold us like cattle, then murdered anyone who threatened to expose his operation." Her words rang with conviction that cut through Briggs' bluster like truth through deception. Several of his deputies shifted uncomfortably, perhaps recognizing the moral weight of her testimony. "Enough!" Briggs shouted, finally drawing his pistol. "I'm taking these criminals back for proper trial." But the elder's warriors had anticipated this moment. Arrows appeared as if by magic, knocked and drawn in a semicircle around the mounted posse. The odds had shifted dramatically, and everyone present understood the new mathematics of survival. Jake felt time slow to honey-thick seconds as Briggs raised his weapon. But instead of targeting Jake or Elena, the sheriff aimed at the elder, recognizing him as the keystone that held the warriors' unity together. The gunshot cracked like breaking thunder, but the elder remained standing. Behind Briggs, one of his own deputies lowered a smoking rifle, his face twisted with disgust. "Enough," the deputy said. "I won't be part of murdering women and children." Briggs spun in his saddle, rage and disbelief warring across his features. "Thompson, you traitorous—" The arrow took him through the shoulder, spinning him sideways and sending his pistol tumbling into the dust. Warriors moved forward like flowing water, surrounding the surviving deputies with drawn weapons and grim expressions. "Council will decide punishment," the elder announced as Briggs writhed in his saddle, blood soaking his shirt. "But first, testimony must be recorded according to territorial law." Jake blinked in surprise. The old man had outmaneuvered them all, creating a legal framework that would make Sarah's evidence admissible in territorial courts, while ensuring justice would be served regardless of official corruption. Over the following hours, Elena's testimony was transcribed by a tribal scribe who'd learned English letters at a mission school. Sarah's papers were authenticated by examination of the paper, ink, and handwriting samples. The ledger's dual-colored entries were verified against known territorial records. Deputy Thompson, freed from Briggs's authority, provided additional testimony about the sheriff's illegal activities. Other members of the posse, faced with evidence of their leader's crimes, began confessing their own roles in the slave trade operation. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the plateau, Jake found himself walking with Elena along the edge of the camp. The immediate danger had passed, but both understood their lives had changed irrevocably in the space of 24 hours. "What happens now?" Elena asked, her hand finding his again. Jake considered the question, weighing options that seemed simultaneously limitless and constrained. Sarah's evidence would expose the corruption, but rebuilding their lives would require different kinds of courage. "Territory will need new sheriffs," he said finally. "People who understand justice comes in different colors and languages." Elena smiled, the first genuine expression of happiness he'd seen from her. "Sarah always said you were the smart one." They stopped walking as the sun touched the western peaks, painting the sky in shades that reminded Jake of his sister's favorite dress. The braided ring still rested in his pocket, its horsehair strands connecting past to present like an unbroken promise. "She'd be proud," Elena said quietly, as if reading his thoughts. Jake nodded, feeling Sarah's presence in the cooling evening air. His sister had died fighting for justice, but her sacrifice had created ripples that would spread far beyond this single mountain plateau. The evidence she'd preserved would free dozens of women, expose corrupt officials, and possibly reform territorial policies toward native peoples. But perhaps more importantly, it had brought Jake and Elena together. Two outcasts united by shared loss and mutual determination to honor Sarah's memory. The future remained uncertain, filled with challenges that would test their resolve and commitment to each other. As stars appeared overhead like scattered diamonds on dark velvet, Jake reached for Elena's hand and found it waiting for his. Together, they walked back toward the council fire, where the elder was preparing formal documents that would carry Sarah's testimony to territorial courts. The path ahead would be difficult, marked by legal battles and social prejudice that wouldn't disappear overnight. But Jake had learned something valuable in the past day. Sometimes the most important victories came not from fighting against injustice, but from standing with someone who shared your commitment to truth. Elena squeezed his hand as they approached the fire. her eyes reflecting flame and starlight in equal measure. Don't forget to subscribe, and consider giving a like to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us. The words seem to come from somewhere beyond the firelight, carrying hope into the darkness like embers on prairie wind.